Hello, Reinhard. How are you today? Welcome back to the another exciting session. How are you?
Thank you. I'm very fine. It's getting winter now here on our side of the world, and we are very busy in keeping things moving in the right direction.
Perfect. So, once again, thank you for all your contribution. You have been contributing generously from your time as well as the knowledge you have. And in the same series, we are bringing a new topic, especially around the scope management. I know scope management is a project management, very important topic, program management, everybody. So that's where we're going to talk about how important it is to manage a scope in the current and future scenarios. So the topic for today, importance of project scope management, current and future scenario. All right. So what are the key elements of a well-defined project scope statement, and how does it impact project execution and success?
Starting from the last part of your question, I think it's very critical because scope management is at the heart of project and program management. Because scope can be defined as all work that needs to be done in order to achieve the objectives of that project or the program. It's kind of setting the boundaries for the project. So what's in scope and maybe also what's out of scope. And it also means we need to decide. It's a decision-making process that we are going through before we start into the project. The scope statement should be very unambiguous. And that's challenging because it's sometimes words matter, formulations, and it takes quite a lot of time to wordsmith kind of scope statements. It should be specific because at the end it should be also very clear. And as I said, unambiguous to all the stakeholders that are involved, and at the end, tangible, because all our deliverables are based on that scope statement. Sometimes I'd like to use a must statement, so what must be in the project, what should be in. So you also see now there's maybe a weaker statement, what could be in, and again, what is also out of scope, what won't be in the project scope. And sometimes, so in my environment, in the automotive industry, it ends up in a long list of requirements, because requirements also very much specify, and that can be that functional requirement, it can be a something that is more product oriented. It should be anyway open to all the solutions. And finally, I would also say it's always good from a project execution side to also state your assumptions, because sometimes in discussing these kind of scope statements, we implicitly have assumption in mind, and don't make those explicit and show it to the client. Also helps to clarify if there's anything that is not on the list of our client.
Yeah, I mean, that's a nutshell. That this is scope statement has to be very clearly identified, what is in scope, what is not in scope, as you mentioned. And the clear boundaries are there, because one of the reasons is there should not be any ambiguity when you're delivering the work and when we're closing the project. Because you should not be, hey, what I was expecting that you would do run the training as well. And he said, no, it's not you assume that it's not your responsibility. And they assume that it's your responsibility. Because nothing has been signed somewhere, it can be both ways. So it's also important to identify not in scope, what is in scope, what is not in scope. Because otherwise you end up having, some kind of conflict, which is not good for the business.
Absolutely.
Exactly. So you mentioned about the assumptions. Very important to identify assumption. When you're starting a project, you don't have all the information. So we have to assume, otherwise we cannot plan. And assumption has to be very clearly identified and very well understood to both parties, because any assumption gone wrong, there's a risk to your project. Yeah. So clearly identified scope will help you to close your project properly, and you can measure the success accordingly. Very well. Thank you. Thank you for this. So how does project scope management impact project budgets and timeline and influence the quality of project deliverables?
Building on the aforementioned, I think it's very clear that if the scope statement comprises all of the work that needs to be done, so we put a lot of effort, work in it, and that can be translated into cost. Call that maybe man or person hours, and that's also time. If we expand the scope, more cost, more effort, more time has to be spent. I think that's very directly, sometimes also indirectly influenced. So there's a very close relationship between those two. Sometimes the relationship with quality is not so obvious, but sure, if I've said that scope statements are very tightly linked to requirements, which state, let's say, a quality expectation, then also the quality of the project delivery is directly related to the scope statement and how I formulate that. If there's any ambiguity, again, that work, then we need to fix that as a quality problem, and that would, again, go back to the budget and the timelines. So that's an extra effort, extra cost, extra time that we would add to that. So this is why it's so important to really have a good scope statement, very specific, measurable, tangible, etc. Because otherwise we end up in quality issues. Customer may be unsatisfied or unhappy, and we need to fix that later. And at the later stage, as you can imagine, that's too expensive then.
Oh yeah, it's very expensive. Yeah. So we're talking about project scope management, yet having a clear defined scope statement with what is in scope, what is in the scope, very important. That is actually driving factor for the budget and timeline and many other things within the project. So along with the scope, we talk about the work breakdown structure, and you break it down into smaller pieces until that can be given, where at the point where that work can be given to another team member or a vendor for them to complete. So that's a scope statement. When we have when we talk about scope baseline, we actually talk about the scope statement, work breakdown structure, and WS dictionary, WS work breakdown dictionary. All the three once gone through the approval process and it's got approved. And if any change required, and very important to follow the change control process. That should be very clearly identified in the scope management plan. That okay, if there's any scope change happen, we follow this change control process, go to the right people, and make sure we agree on the scope and impact of the scope change on the cost and the time. Okay, or any other impact, quality impact or something. The problem happens when the customer likes you to add more to the scope, but not willing to pay more. Okay, and that's the scope creep.
Absolutely, yeah. But that's again under the assumption that you work in a more traditional way, because we may also later discuss about agile ways, because then you don't have a work breakdown structure. Then you don't do that, and then you transfer that, let's say, those changes into the process. Because in a traditional way, the assumption is that you can plan everything before you start the project.
Yeah,
and definitely that's then the good opportunity to fix your scope. And then underway, you may change the scope statement time by time, but I think that's the unexpected case. In the agile world, the unexpected way is the normal case, the routine work. So this is why in the agile world, typically you don't really focus too much on this kind of WBS and then scope statements, etc. So I think that's also a bit of change in project management world right now. but we may later address that too.
Yeah. So, agile is totally different. If you're running agile project, yes, there's a different way of managing, having a product backlog and the prioritization, reprioritization. That's kind of and that's the purpose of agile. So we can change the scope if required and still get the value for the customer. But the traditional project management, yes, when you have to build a bridge, for example, we have to have clarity on the distance, the length, and everything has to be agreed upon. And somebody wants, hey, can we add 1 meter extra to the width? I'm sure we can, but there's extra cost. So that cost has to be identified and has to be communicated and agreed. You can't say, okay, add 1 meter on the side, which is 1 kilometer of the bridge. That means you can do the mathematics. Is a huge cost. So I mean, I'm just saying, nobody going to do that. It's an extreme example, but that's the kind of that's where the problem start. Somebody come, can you add this? Or developer say, yeah, don't worry, I will do that. And without realizing the impact of this change on the overall the development work and the testing work and the overall implementation, that's where we talk about. The next question I have is about the scope. So we'll talk more about that. Yeah. So what role does effective scope management play in preventing scope creep? Following up from the previous question.
Yeah, actually, that's also very close related. If you are not clear in the communication with the customer to clarify what actually he wants and start the project on this basis, I think then step by step the customer steps in and says, but that's not what I want. I want maybe a different setup here or an additional function there. Sure, we can manage that with a change request management process. So again, also change request management is pretty much closely linked to what we talk about scope management. But that may also end up in a constant change. And that's what I see in some of my projects at the moment. So that customer says, okay, here we have an account. There's a project, and let's also do this and that, move everything into that project. And that's a very bad decision because then it ends up to be a never-ending story. And you can be very professional in your change request management process, but then it's too complex. It's ending up like a chewing gum. And as I said, so you should focus on a specific scope. You should be also pretty decisive then in saying, okay, how far do you expand that scope in that specific process or project? And if there's too big expansion needed or requested by the customer, then better start a second project or doing a follow-up project or whatsoever. I think that's very important. And to avoid scope creep, sure, as I said, very unambiguous goals, very clear specification, also tough talk to the customer, because my experience is also that client often does not really know what he wants or what the customer wants. And so again, you can using specific questions. Is it this or is it that? Or how about this? That you can guide the client towards a really clear scope statement. So again, it's all communication and it's also discipline because otherwise you end up in scope creep.
Exactly. And did you have experience where actually the scope creep happened and that created a problem to you or to other projects?
Can you repeat that, please? It was...
No. Okay, I'm asking, is that happened to you or anybody you know, and that has impacted the project gone from successful to unsuccessful because it was not managed effectively, the scope was keep increasing, and anything happen in
Yes.
the real?
Absolutely, that happens in infrastructure projects. especially in the public sphere here in Germany. If the politicians, typically they set the expectations, and if they see, okay, let's take the example of our Philharmonic building in Hamburg, Elbphilharmonie. They did not only want to have, or the mayor did not only want to have a Philharmonic building, but then he said, but we want to have the world's best acoustic. So he asked for a Japanese star designer, and he totally redesigned the whole interior with very specific acoustic elements. And you can imagine what happened. So at the end, the budget was 10 times.
Wow.
And it was several years delays because sure, that was nearly not manageable to have these very complex construction elements to make the acoustic really well. So for the mayor, it was, yes, that's my building, and everyone will listen to that. And he wanted to have a good iconic building. But for the project, is often very dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the sponsor got what he want. Of course, he changed the if they are changing the scope from what normal acoustic to the Japanese style or some modern, then of course they have to pay for that. But that the change happen with this, documentation is there. Somebody says, okay, let's talk about it, and this person architect come, this is the cost, this is the impact. That is still, I don't see the scope creep, but it's actually change in scope, change in strategy altogether, because we have documented everything and we have an extra budget and time, agreed time. So that's why. But if somebody say, hey, halfway through, can you change the acoustic from here to there? But I'm not ready to pay for this. Just a minor change. Yeah, don't worry. And you realize that you end up having bigger than much bigger than what you thought.
Yes. But previous, we are here in an area where one person, the mayor, with public money, taxpayers' money, wants to have, let's say, an individual concern being imposed on the project, not talking to the ones that approved that project in the beginning.
Yeah.
Because typically also there are governance issues that he is also the steering the chair of the steering committee, and it's the owner of the project, and maybe the head of the project management department of the city. So this is a mix of many things, and you say, sure, he's not willing to pay the extra cost, not out of his own pocket, but he's playing with the taxpayers' money. That would not be acceptable at all in the private industry. But these are the kind of problems we see in these kind of public projects. But that's just one example. I'm not saying that's only in the public industry, but also in IT projects. You often see that this functionality of the software is not good enough, and then everyone jumps in and wants with this specific solution, that specific solution. And I think there's a change beyond reason happening in many projects, and that's what I would call scope creep.
Exactly. All right. Thank you for sharing. So is it a reality or a myth for a project manager to ensure consistency with the contract or statement of work on which the project is based throughout the lifetime of the project?
We start with the definition of what is a contract. It's a mutual agreement, and typically the mutual agreement is about the scope of the project. So, and again, that's between two parties, between two independent parties, so the contractor and the one owning the project. And this is why, sure, that's very closely related with the scope management. So project managers need to ensure the consistency. Basically, the statement of work is the Bible for the project manager to follow. And that's throughout the whole life cycle of the project. If there's something unspecific, again, we are ending up in scope creep. We may end up even here, because it's a contract, in disputes, in extra efforts, penalties, delays, conflicts. And that may even stop a project because parties cannot agree on the status or maybe the result of what's coming out of that project. So absolutely, and it's legally enforceable. So if it's a contract with a legal basis, then it's even more important to manage it compared to maybe an internal project where you just have an internal customer where it's maybe not that tough from a legal perspective.
Yeah, and I mean, like there can be some changes, but should be documented. Whatever we agreed in the contract, we have a statement of work. If any deviation, make sure that is added as addendum or whatever. Then agreement is there. Again, this is again another contract, but it's not the revising full contract, but addendum, which can be seen as part of the contract. But at least you documented, agreed upon what is added to the scope, what is added to the cost, what is added to the schedule.
Yeah, but see, if you have a contract as a basis for the project, I see typically more discipline, because in the contract, there's also a procedure of how to ensure that if there's a change in scope, that you need to document it, you need to involve maybe a change board if it's above a certain value, and there are consequences if that's not done. So, and again, it's legally enforceable. It also means there are consequences. So all people are more careful if there's a contract between two parties involved. If it's an internal project, you don't have that. And typically there's where you see a lot more lack of discipline.
Yeah, I mean, you still have some kind of project charter or some statement of work, which you still kind of legally you have to, but yes, it's internal, so it doesn't matter too much. Yeah, with the I was thinking a question in between the contract. I think it's gone out of my mind, but yes, so it's gone actually. When it's come, I will talk again. But yeah, so the contracts are there for a purpose, so that we are delivering as per the contract. Anytime we are deviating, of course, there has to be agreement with two parties, and that has to be documented. Actually, my question came back to now, now back to me. So, have you seen companies, in order to win the business, they underquote and then they rely on the change management or the scope change, and companies end up paying more money because of this under budgeting, underquoting, and later on end up paying more money. Have you seen that, something like this?
That's what we quite frequently see in the public sector, and we see it in the construction business and so on, specifically there, because it's tough competition. So people try to, let's say, be very competitive what concerns their offer. But then at the end, they're building on this unspecific or very ambiguous scope statement or requirements lists and so on. And then the additions, they are priced up or marked up very significantly. But I think that's also a dangerous route to go as a contractor, because also the client will be very unhappy and unsatisfied, and he may also impose other rules and regulations or not involve that contractor for the second or third contract. So in my company, we are more interested in a long-term relationship, so it should be fair. I just had a contract negotiation where the purchasing department of our client wanted to have a clear fixed price to a specific target, and I said, come on, we can do that, but certainly we will price in the risk of any extensions that you do not want to cover. And I also said it's very unflexible. So now we would need to have addendums for any small change that you would like to have. Typically we say, let's have a budget, a ceiling contract, where we have a certain expectation towards the budget in the end, but we are more flexible, also charging maybe with a bonus system to stay below that, and not with malus systems if you were not staying in the fixed price and liquidated damages and whatever. So I think the purchasing department needs to be more flexible in that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, without naming a company, I joined that company for some time, and the first, I was 6 days I was in training. So the training is good, but there were 2-hour training about the change management, change request, how to raise the change request. And this is a very high tech company and modern company. And this guy was walking us through a mainframe based system where you cannot copy and paste. I said, what are you doing? You have so beautiful system, you are selling it to the other customer, and you are expecting us to type here, copy, you're not allowed to copy and paste. And so look, it's very simple. When you spend 1 hour on raising the change request, we pay $100 to you, we'll be charging $500 to the client. So that is also, so look, this is unethical, when you can do a good job, a customer, actually, you were right, clients are watching. You may manage to get some more money in this contract, and unless they are, everybody corrupt, that's a different story. But they watch and they say, hang on, this is what we have experienced with you, or without even telling you, they may go to somebody else. And that become a perception about this company, and you start losing the business. So be ethical and do the right thing, basically.
You always need to decide whether you will be short-term oriented.
Yeah.
You can make a short-term profit, or that you are rather long-term oriented to make a continuous business. And I think it's very obvious what the best choice is here. Because if you do a one-off business, then you're out of business because the clients are not stupid.
Yeah, they will realize, and when they talk to other potential clients, they have to do whatever. Don't talk to these guys. These are anyway. It is a practice which should not be happening. Okay, so my next question is, how often do you revise your scope baseline, and what are the changes it has undergone over the years? Share your experience, please.
Dharam, is very different. So because it really depends on the relationship we have to our customer.
Yeah.
If we prefer to have long-term relationship with our customers, so we know pretty clear at the beginning of a project, okay, what shall we focus on in the communication? Who is clear on his specification? Where do we need to ask more and invest more time in the beginning of a project? So spending more time to clarify everything. Because if we have a good communication and relationship with the customer, I think there are not so many changes needed. Again, if we don't have trust, no good relationship, more this kind of fixed price model mentality, a purchasing department that is very, let's say, narrow-minded, then you may end up in doing nitty-gritty changes, and you may have a change list where you follow up all these scope changes and so on, and then in the end you end up in a negotiation and discussion on that. But you're already starting from a negative relationship basis. So this is why we always say better invest in the relationship in the beginning, have good communication. So what we do right now with the customer, we have started a few weeks back with a kickoff. We invited them to a nice evening dinner and so on. So, and So it's not just having dinner or so. It is about building relationship, opening up our minds, and that helps you, and also preventing that you have these nitty-gritty changes of your scope baseline. A bit more flexibility. It should not be too narrow, too tight, because otherwise you are always in a change situation. But it should also not be too loose, too wide open. So it's somewhere in between, and that's totally related to our relationship and the trust we have with our customer.
Yeah, and that's very important. You mentioned that having the threshold defined plus minus, where you're allowed to make some decision, and if it is too narrow, then you end up having too many administrative problems, and if it's too wider, then the service provider may be taking advantage of that. So that has to be thoughtfully we think properly and agree on a particular arrangement, which help you to sometimes, yes, some of the things we may not have to change, as scope is there, but it's a minor change. Do we have to go through the full change control process and end up paying more money to go through change control process than the change itself? Let's get the change, and you, as part of your extra threshold you have or buffer you have, you can utilize that buffer for that purpose. But be mindful of how much change. Every time somebody says, okay, let me get something in within my threshold every time, and you end up having bigger than thought, because there's a loopholes always. People look for loopholes. Because if it's asking for the limit is 500,000, and I will put a request for 499,000. And I will get away with that. And next time I will another change request with 499, so I don't have to worry about going through the whole process. So these processes are there for a reason. Again, these processes has to be for reason, not for red tape or blocking the progresses. Again, there has to be optimization has to be done. And it's actually a very important area. How often we baseline and how much trust you have between you and the service providers.
And actually, in this last contract that we just signed a few weeks back, we also negotiated with the client a slack of 10% on the whole volume, which is a big volume. And we agreed on the procedure, how to use that extra money or buffer reserve, whatever you would call it. And we said, okay, if there's anything popping up unforeseen that we need to add to the project, we believe that's maybe maximum up to 10%. There we have an extra money, which we could use, but the procedure is that we need to claim it or label it as extra, and the client needs to agree that it is extra, and so we have more flexibility in the project. And I think that's a friendly approach.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've seen some practices where they say time and material, and with the ceiling up to this, and I see the bills are actually whatever we agreed at the time, the ceiling every time, even the time material, but the invoices are up to that limit only. So I thought we spend less time compared to what you're billing. So look, Dharam, we have to whatever contract we have agreed upon, we have to bill for that. Otherwise, my boss will call me. I mean, there are some practices which I don't like it, but companies are using it, and the problem is you end up having bad name. The lesson learned from the other side. They will be more careful when you're dealing with. Yes, you are, as again coming back to the short-term gain versus long-term relationship.
Absolutely.
Okay, what is the significance of managing project scope in the agile environment?
Yeah, okay. Now we had this discussion. I think the process is a different one, because in an agile environment, we don't work on WBS. And we certainly need to talk about scope, but the scope is typically built on, let's say, the value. It's value-based. It's also maybe more feature or product based, specifying what would be the products in the end. So it's not much focused on work. I think that's a big difference. The work itself, it's basically planned by the team in the process or through the process. And as you also know, that we have certain product features, functionalities, and so on, that would end up in a backlog, that the team pulls out of the backlog these kind of features and defines, let's say, the work to be done in order to produce that feature based on the capacity or the resources that are available. And they only work up to that limit of the resources because they don't want to be overloaded, because otherwise that's blocking. So it's a totally different procedure that we are going through. And it's a totally also different view on that. Some say, okay, it's better than the approach that we defined. I would not support that. That's not a better or worse. It really depends on what is the project content all about. If we want to have a car in the end, so we need to have a car in the end and not a truck or a plane or a tractor. So this is why you need to have, in a way, a predictable WBS with tangible deliverables in the end. And you may work on those in some iterations and so on. That's fine. But at the end, you have a very predictable result. If you're working on something more creative, innovative, which is not specified like a software or a product design or whatever, then sure, you can turn it around and say, okay, it's not the, let's say, the specification that I start from. No, it's but rather an ambition or a desire, which is then broken down in more tangible work or activities by the team themselves. So it's a different philosophy, and it really depends on what kind of deliverables we are actually working on.
Yeah, I mean, in agile environment, scope is a little bit fluid. It's not as I mean, still there has to be a scope. You can't just say, okay, as you correctly we want a car, you don't want to end up building a truck. You know, the scope was to build a car. It has to be car. Some maybe some features are changed here and there. Some headlights are changed. Now you have look, but you can't say, hey, I end up building a truck, which is you know. But yes, the scope has to be agreed upon as a backlog, which can be changed as based on the product owner's request and team's engagement, and that based on the relationship. And you at the end of the day, the customer has to be happy. You know, the customer who is paying money, they get the product a little bit extra here and there, fine. But you again, they are changing the scope, fine. But you also get paid for that. But whatever we do, we still have an agreement, or not agreement, but we agree that these are the changes. Somewhere we have noted down that you ask for the headlight. Yes, we added your headlight as well to that.
I'm coming from the engineering world. And in the past, specification requirements were very much on the product specifications. That you show the look-alike of this kind of product, the diameter, blah, 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 all these very specific, but you had a clear, tangible product in mind. Now, in the agile world, to turn this a bit around, you say, okay, I don't speak about the very tangible product in the end. I'd like to have these kind of feature or functionality. And the cars can also be, let's say, a roller coaster or a truck or something. It's just something on 4 wheels, bringing you from A to B. If you're that open, you can also start working agile. But if you have a very clear, let's say, Mercedes or Audi in mind, with a specific design, with specific, let's say, features, then agile may be not the right way of starting into the project. Somewhere in between, you may work agile, but then you may have a hybrid approach where you start with clear specifications, and you have windows of opportunities for agile working.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, what trends and challenges do you foresee in the coming future, especially the scope management part?
Yeah. When we say traditional project management was building on the assumption that in the lifespan of the project, the requirements will be stable. There will be no changes or not much changes. I think that changed dramatically. That we see in the markets a lot of volatility requirement, and that means more flexibility, more agility needed. And that has something to do with contracting. That has something to do with flexibility through change control, change management, change request management, etc. So we cannot just narrow-minded walk in one way. I think that's definitely one trend. And we discussed that already. I think another trend in the future may be using AI technologies. So I just finished a study on certain technologies, and certainly I think one strength is to identify clients' expectations through documents, standards, protocol, minutes, and so on, and capture it more than we just talk, ask some simple questions. So AI may be more capable of compiling a scope statement in a more professional and certainly faster way. So I think we will see a lot of AI used in that specific area. I think in the scope statements, we will see in future more aspects covered like sustainability.
Yes.
Because that's not just a trend in our society, but that has also an impact on project management. And so the project process needs to be more sustainable, but also the project product needs to be more sustainable, and that needs to be embedded in the scope statements. And maybe the final thing, the fourth one, is that we also think more in scenarios, because it's not now, let's say, just one thing that we deliver in the future. So this deliverable may be dependent on other deliverables, that may be also dependent on the context. Maybe new competitors come on the market, and then we need to maybe switch to a more competitive design or different price model or whatever. And so these kind of scenarios may be worked on in the project scope management through gamification. That may sound a bit funny, but I just today had a conversation with a provider of this kind of gamification tools, where also CEOs and sponsors can play a little bit like games, which show them scenarios, very visual, to develop their view on the expected outcome of the project. And that may also play a more tangible role in scope management. These are the four things I would mention here.
So when you say gamification, are we talking about scenario analysis? What if analysis? What if that happen? If we have a consistent, the war continue for some more time, if we have this, if we have this.
Yes, sure. That's behind it, but the way of presentation in a game style is a very different way, and
it's more engaging.
That's encouraging people more to, let's say, play with these scenarios. It's more flexible because powered by the PC performance that we have nowadays. So I think we can just also evaluate more various variants and scenarios to come up with what we actually really want.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. I mean, 3D modeling is another way. Let's do some, to check it in advance. Yeah, you mentioned AI based. That's interesting. AI based, of course, helping in the writing the scope statement and what should be there, what should not be there. That is going to be more and more, I think, more often going to happen. And maybe an AI based PMIS system, which gives you alerts in advance, which says, hey, you're going out of scope or about to go out of scope. So I'm looking at the trend. So some of these things can be useful in the coming future, and agile based, more and more work will happen. Agile based technology, more flexibility. Contracts are looking for more flexibility, more changes, more fluidity. So
Yeah. And just think of ChatGPT or generative AI in general. You nowadays can just enter, let's say, certain parameters in ChatGPT, and it will come up with a proposal of a well-written scope statement. Whether you will like it or not, but it's a very fast way of at least having an 80% proposal for the scope statement, and then you spend some time in tweaking it, bringing it up to your own expectations. At least that will have an impact. Make your life also a little bit easier, or make the scope statement more tangible, as you may have written it in your own words.
Exactly. You correctly said, using Chat GPT or some kind of tools, give them parameter. Of course, you can ask, can you give me a scope statement for this? No, you have to define the parameter. You may have to give some starting, you actually have to give some starting point. These are the things I'm looking for. This is in scope. What is in scope? So you still have to give information. And yes, believe it or not, ChatGPT will give you a very well written document, which of course you should look into defining as per your style, or something. Maybe it's just a tool. It may give you some information and which may not be aligned with client's expectation or something. Just revise it if required. And also be careful when you're presenting this chat GPT generated information. There are particular style, and if you putting that, say, for PfMP application or PgMP application, examiner or the panel reviewer can actually find it out whether this is your own work or chat GPT work. And if they realize that chat GPT work or a plagiarized work, then I'm talking not of the scope part, but from the exam point of view or the university point of view, just be careful about the language or style that they give you. Maybe take the information, convert it in your own style.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
But that will be the trend.
Yeah. Look, Reinhard, thank you very much for this another insightful session. Very, very, very engaging. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience. So far you have been contributing, and you will be contributing more and more. And I'm very happy to have you in this discussion. Any last minute thoughts or discussion?
No, I think it shows that we are at the heart of project and program management. Scope is, I think, the key thing. And it's about communication. It's not just about methodologies or processes or technologies. So it is about communication, building relationship. We touched a lot of soft aspects. But at the end, that helps you to manage your project and program in a most professional way.
Exactly.
Thanks, Dharam.
Thank you very much, and good luck to you, and good luck to all.